but I'm particularly excited for what we have going on today's session. Very, very special affinity to it because I am bringing on some people from my tribe at Reserva, the first fully funded youth nature reserve, and we are doing some amazing discussions, youth experts on so many elements, so many critical discussions about biodiversity. So we're going to hear from a few of them today, and I'm very, very excited because I'm part of the board of directors for Reserva, and we have amazing people as part of our group. So enough about me. You already know I'm hyped. I try to bring energy to science. If you've been feeling down so far within this session, it's time to get hyped because we're going to have some fun discussions and dialogue about biodiversity and conservation and rainforest protection. But make sure while we're doing this, you guys go in and donate. Everything that we make from this festival is going towards conservation. All right. So without further ado, I got my very, very first guest that I'm about to bring on board, Lucy Houliston. I'm going to give her a quick introduction. She's a zoologist, digital content producer, National Geographic young explorer with a passion for the weirder side of wildlife, kind of like me. I love it. I love it. And she's also a fellow board member of Reserva. Lucy, I am bringing you on to the stream. What is up? How you doing today?
Intro.
It's good to see you. It's good to see you. I am always personally excited because you are doing so many amazing things globally for our world and helping change our world for the better. So I'm excited for everybody to hear a little bit about you, your story, and some cool fun facts. And I'll let you dive in afterwards. I'll jump in for a little bit, with some questions that I have and some questions from the audience. But this is your time to shine, girl. All right, so I'm gonna let you rock.
Oh, thank you. So I'll kick off with a quick intro to me and what exactly I do. And then I'll explain exactly why we're all here and what it is that connects all of us young people that are about to speak today. Let me just share my screen. If it works. Seems to be having a few issues. Let's see if this works.
I'll chat with you. I'll chat with you while you go ahead and search. We're in this virtual stage, so we always got some tech difficulties, which is perfectly fine.
I'm not sure if it doesn't seem to be showing up the option to share the screen. It just
the option to share.
So I might not be able to share.
All right, let me see if I can fix that for you on my end at all. Okay, let's see. I might be able to. I'm gonna try to check here on the back end. If anybody on the back end, Jesse may know. Somebody may know. We'll see here. We're gonna find a way to make this work. Do you have a PowerPoint that you're gonna share?
Yeah. I do, yeah.
Hey, Mayor. Hey, Lucy. So, if you want to bring something up, is when you press screen share on the bottom of the screen, it's just not coming up at all for you? No option whatsoever?
It flashes and disappears. So I've got it and then it goes. I can't click anything.
You are the first to have that technical difficulty. That's kind of like a record. Just on the 25th hour, we finally had the most unique issue come up. So way to go. Well, worst case scenario, you know your stuff better than absolutely anyone, and you can share a little bit with us. And then if you want to email me, or if any of your colleagues have the presentation, you can email it to us, and we'll make sure we can try and bring it up and showcase anything if we can't get it up on your computer.
Okay, great. I don't think it's going to work unless I hop out and hop back in again. But I don't know if we've got time. So
yeah, it's okay. I'd go ahead and rock. We're here. We're all ears for what you have to say, Lucy. So
okay, all right. Well, so I'm Lucy, and hello again. And right now I'm at university in London, and I'm studying for an undergraduate degree in zoology. And alongside my degree, I'm involved in quite a number of different things. I'm a freelance digital content producer by trade, and the range of things I do is quite broad. It spans from writing to managing social media channels, to scripting, directing, and producing live digital broadcasts. But more often than not, the jobs that I do are linked in some way to natural history and to conservation. And as Maynard mentioned earlier this year, I was also lucky enough to be named as one of National Geographic's newest young explorers. So I've got a big project I'm running, supported by them, that's just got going, and that's all about celebrating the stranger side of wildlife here in the UK. And I've done quite a bit of conservation volunteer work, both at home and overseas, since I was a teenager, and now I serve on the board of directors for Reserva, and I'm also a member of its International Youth Council, which at the moment consists of over 50 young people from, I think, 15 different countries, and everyone speaking here tonight is a member of that group. And what makes Reserva so special is that it is an entirely youth-led organisation. You know, the Youth Council isn't just a group of young representatives or ambassadors. It's way more than that. We really are the driving force behind what the organisation does. And one of Reserva's key missions is to empower passionate young people in conservation and to give them a platform where they can not only be heard, but also make a real direct action themselves, take action themselves to protect biodiversity and to solve some of the challenges that nature's facing. So all of us here tonight are currently working to create the world's first ever youth-funded nature reserve that will one day, we hope, be part of a huge network of youth-funded reserves across the globe. And this flagship site that we've got, our very first site, is called the Dracula Youth Reserve. And I was going to show you what it looks like, but just picture the most pristine, densely packed forest you can possibly think of, high elevation, shrouded in clouds. It's in the Chocó cloud forest in northwestern Ecuador, and it's a 1,219 acre plot packed full of rare, critically endangered and even undiscovered species. I can actually share my screen now. For some reason it's working, so that's great. I can show you some of these things. And I will share that with you now. So here I am actually exploring in that patch of forest. I'm just going to zip through some of my slides. So this is the Youth Council here, and here we go. This is what the site looks like. It's just incredible. 1,219 acre plot. And I did touch on weird wildlife a few moments ago at the start of the talk, and I've always had a bit of a soft spot for the odd and the ugly and the overlooked plants and animals, and that's kind of become my trademark thing. Here I am staring lovingly at a sloth. And so I thought I'd kick things off by introducing you to some of the reserve's more unusual residents. And I'm going to start with this. Of course, the site is packed full of all sorts of weird and wonderful plants, but this is one of my favourites. It's a species of orchid called Fragmentation fisheri, and you'll probably agree that it is quite pretty, but you might be wondering what's so unusual about it. Well, it's actually one of the rarest plants in the world. There are thought to be as few as 10 to 15 adult individuals of this species remaining on the planet. It's incredibly, incredibly rare, and Ian, who'll be coming on a bit later, will be talking a bit more about the site's plants and its orchids. But next up, the site is also home to these. This is a species of Bolita Glossa salamander, and that nose is just the best nose. And the feet as well. What a strange looking thing. It has no lungs. It breathes through its skin, and it also, so I've been told, has the fastest tongue in the animal kingdom. The site is also teeming with frogs as well. Again, you'll hear more about these from Zane very shortly, but this one I think is particularly interesting. It's a red-spotted glass frog, and even though these frogs are absolutely tiny, They're really, really ferocious. They're carnivores that feast on insects, and they're also highly territorial. The males will actually fight with each other to defend their patch, and they're even equipped with special weapons. I don't think you can see it in this picture, but they have a bony spine on the inside of their forelegs, and they use that to fight their opponents. You might have noticed the red spot on this frog's toe pad at the very front, on its front foot, and that isn't a marking, it's actually a bloody patch, which is probably from an earlier fight. So this session might be called Dracula Youth Reserve Power Hour, but I'm actually going to finish up by talking about one of the slowest, most infamously lazy members of the animal kingdom. It's another one of my favourite odd animals. Not only have I become quite well acquainted with it over the past couple of years thanks to my work, but it's also a species that's found on our site, like some of the things that you just saw. And the animal that I'm talking about is, and to any of you that know me, this will come as no surprise, it is the sloth. So since 2018, I've been working as digital content producer for the Sloth Appreciation Society. And in that time, I've spoken to sloth scientists, I've delivered talks about sloths online and in schools, I've made videos about them. But a couple of summers ago, I actually got to spend 3 months living and working at a sloth rescue and rehabilitation centre out in Panama. And that experience gave me a really unique and intimate insight into these animals' lives, and also helped me to better understand some of the threats that they're currently facing out in the wild. But before I get onto that more serious stuff, I've got for you 3 of my favourite strange sloth facts. So here goes. Hopefully I can convince you that they are some of the best odd animals out there. I'll jump straight in with number 1, which is all to do with their claws. And their claws aren't your typical claws at all. They are, in fact, elongated, protruding finger bones. And you can see that quite clearly in this photo of a 3-toed sloth skeleton, while the claws of most other mammals are made of keratin, which you probably know is the same material that our nails and our hair is made of. But theirs are actually made of bone. And mainly this is because it makes them really, really strong. So it means that sloths can hang and clamber around upside down in the treetops without having any trouble. The second fact is that they have very strange bathroom habits that are, at the moment, a complete mystery to scientists. Because they have such a slow rate of digestion, and to give you an idea of how slow that actually is, it takes a 3-toed sloth like Marley here, on average, around 30 days to digest a single leaf. They only go to the toilet about once every 5 to 7 days because of this slow digestion. It depends on the species. And when they do, they don't just go up in the canopy, but they climb all the way down to the ground, and which you can imagine takes quite some time for a sloth. And then once they're down there, they do what's become known as the Poo Dance. So 3-toed sloths will grab onto the base of a tree, like you can see here. They'll kind of hug the base of the tree, and they will wiggle their bums around, and they dig a little hole in the ground with their short stumpy tails. And that's where they'll do their business. And then when they're done, they'll climb all the way back into the canopy again. And yeah, scientists still haven't figured out exactly why they do this, but they think it might be some sort of signposting system for potential mates, some sort of display of fitness. So fact number 3, last but not least, these 3-toed sloths can actually rotate their heads around a full 270 degrees. And the benefits of that is that it helps the sloth to search for food in a very energy efficient way. It means they're able to kind of graze the leaves all around them without having to move the rest of their body much, if at all. And that's really great for an animal that has to survive on a diet of leaves that provides them with as few as 180 calories a day. So going back to those threats I mentioned earlier, one of the questions I often get asked is, are sloths endangered? And currently 2 of the 6 species of sloth actually are. So this one is the main sloth of Brazil, and that's been listed as vulnerable to extinction by the IUCN. And the second is the pygmy sloth, which is listed as critically endangered. And scientists think that there's only something like 200 or so individual pygmy sloths remaining in the wild. Their population is stable, which is good, but the island they live on, which is just off the coast of Panama, is at risk of being developed and built on for tourism. Thankfully, a group from ZSL, the Zoological Society of London, are currently working to monitor and protect the pygmy sloth. But what about the other 4 species? On official terms, they're actually doing okay. They're not classified as endangered, but they are becoming increasingly threatened by human activity, to the point that now their biggest threat no longer comes from natural predation, but from loss of habitat. And most of the animals that are brought into sanctuaries in Central and South America are either injured or orphaned. And the driving factor in most cases is habitat fragmentation, which most of you probably know. It basically means when the forest they live in is divided up into much smaller chunks by things like roads and areas of housing. And this, of course, increases the chance of sloths wandering into urban areas and coming into contact with humans and other potential dangers. For example, a lot of sloths end up being hit by cars when they try and cross a road. They wander into people's gardens and they end up being attacked by domestic dogs. And sometimes they're even electrocuted when they attempt to climb along electricity power cables. A lot of the sloths that I saw coming in when I was at the rescue centre that I mentioned were just disorientated. They'd wandered into urban areas where, you know, it's loud and they couldn't find food. And I actually got to go out and help rescue a sloth from somebody's front garden, and we relocated it. We took it right into the middle of a nearby national park, which is nice and big and protected against destruction. And we released him and he knew exactly what to do. He shot straight up into the canopy. And those releases, they were definitely a highlight. You know, they're always so amazing to watch, and it's a sight you just never get bored of. It's so rewarding, especially when it's an animal that you've helped to take care of for a while. And these protected areas, you know, reserves, national parks, they're all vital for animals and plants, whether they're officially classified as endangered or not. So many species, they just can't adapt quickly enough to our rapidly changing world, which is why it's so great that there are organisations and individuals working and giving up their time to protect them through rescue and conservation efforts, and also through the protection of their habitats. And of course, Reserva is one of those organisations, and it's just really great to be a part of those efforts. So yeah, I think next we're going to stick to the forest canopy. So Saf's going to introduce you to some much faster, more energetic animals that are found on the Dracula Youth Reserve. But yeah, first I think it's back over to Maynard.
Yes, Lucy, that was absolutely awesome. No matter how many times I see this site, I'm still enamored by how beautiful it is. It's always a constant reminder of what we're working to protect. Before I bring in Sath, quick question for you. What blows your mind more, new plant discoveries or new wildlife discoveries?
Oh, you know what? I kind of want to say plants, just because I don't know. They're just nobody. I think it's important that we shout about those because
yes,
well, they're so key. They are what make the habitat what it is, and they need a bit more. They need championing.
They need some love. We got to show the plants some love too.
Exactly, and there are so many plants that are endangered and are in trouble, and they're not they're not getting the attention that they deserve. So I think it's important that we shout about the new plants that we find, and they are amazing. I managed to spend some time out on the reserve, and I didn't know much about orchids before I went, but my mind was just blown by all the different species and the weird and wonderful species that I saw while I was there. So
nice. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Lucy. That was absolutely amazing. And you already did a great intro for bringing on Sathvika Krishnan, which is going to be absolutely amazing. A wildlife enthusiast herself and an avid musician, which I love because I'm the hip hop MD and talk hip hop science. So we're going to bring her on board right now to do some more discussions here as we talk more about the Dracula Reserve and beyond. So thank you, Lucy. I'm transitioning you out, and I'm about to bring on Sath. All right. Thanks again, Lucy. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Without further ado, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. It is great to have you on board. I think Lucy already gave you an intro, said you're going to talk some canopy talk today. Yeah. Right? Is that what we're doing? Some canopy talk?
Yeah, we're going to be talking a little bit about the musicality of birdsong today. Yes. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah.
What better collaboration than to have the hip hop MD, and we're talking about the music of birdsong. I absolutely love it. I'm excited to hear this one. So I'm gonna let you take it away and go ahead and give us some details about bird musicians. I love it. It's all you.
Okay, thank you so much. So yeah, I'm Sathvika Krishnan. I'm a 19-year-old wildlife enthusiast and conservationist from the UK. And today I'll be talking to you all about the musicality of birdsong. Before I begin talking, I'm just going to play a short piano excerpt from a very famous piece of classical music, and let's see if you recognize it. So there I just played the piano reduction score arranged by Franz Liszt of the Symphony No. 5 in C minor by Ludwig van Beethoven, Opus 67. This is one of the most frequently played symphonies, and it is widely considered one of the cornerstones of Western music. The first movement, the Allegro con brio, opens with this 4-note motif known as the Fate motif. And it's called the Fate motif because it represents fate knocking at the door. But what has this got to do with the musicality of birdsong? Well, on our site in Ecuador, you can find a really interesting bird called the white-breasted wood wren. And I'm just going to try and share my screen so you can see a photo of him. Yeah, there you go. So this is the white-breasted wood wren. This small passerine, or songbird, lives in the montane forest and forages actively in low vegetation or on the ground, in neither pairs or as a family group. It mainly eats insects and other invertebrates, but the most interesting factoid about this little bird is that its call is very, very similar to the opening bars of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, Symphony No. 5. In fact, it not only uses the same rhythm, which means the arrangement of note lengths, short, 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 long, but it also uses the same notes, G and E flat, or the dominant, the fifth note, mediant, the third note of the scale. Now, it's highly, highly unlikely that, I don't think you could have seen, you could see my slide, apparently. Okay, that's fine.
We were hoping to see your picture, your slide as you're narrating. Maybe try again real quick so we can see exactly what you're referring to there.
Can you see it now?
Nope, not yet. There we go.
Okay, right. Yeah.
Awesome.
So
now we can see the beauty. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the white-breasted wood wren. Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out. So yeah, its song uses the same notes, G and E flat. Now, it's highly, highly unlikely that Beethoven was directly inspired by this very bird, considering there's about 10,490 kilometers between Vienna and Ecuador. The parallels between the bird call and the motif are purely coincidental as a result of the use of a diatonic scale, which means the C minor scale, a very heroic and stormy key that Beethoven loved to use. Now, it is said that Beethoven actually was inspired by a bird called the yellowhammer. In fact, those of you from Europe or New Zealand and Australia, you may be familiar with the yellowhammer song because it's been transcribed with the words, "a little bit of bread and no cheese." Carl Czerny, who was one of Beethoven's pupils, actually claimed that the little pattern of notes came to Beethoven's head as he was walking through Prater Park in Vienna, and he heard the song of a yellowhammer. Now, this just goes to show you that birdsong has inspired composers across the globe through so many genres and generations. From tribal music to electronic music, there are so many composers and musicians who have made direct references to the wonderful compositions of our avian artists. Now, I'd like to talk about the musicality of birdsong from a slightly different aspect. We've just seen how pitch and tune can be used to highlight the similarities between birdsong and music. But now let's move away from melody and move on to percussion and rhythm. A percussion instrument is basically a musical instrument that is sounded when you struck it, scrape it, or hit it. For example, drum kits and marimbas. While some people think that melody is paramount when defining music, many genres are based entirely on rhythmic or percussive elements. If you think about rap, or konnakol. Konnakol is the South Indian art of vocal percussion, with the syllables derived from percussion instruments like the mridangam. I will now perform some natvangam, which is very, very similar to konnakol, except it involves cymbals and is used to accompany classical dance. Tariku tanaka takata, tanaka takata, kinaka takata, janaku takatariku tanuku tanuku kinaku janaku kudariku takatariku. Tariku tanuku janaku kudari krigatariku. Tariku tanuku janaku kudari krigatariku. Now that jati or string of syllabic beats was in the 8-beat cycle Adi Talam. And despite lacking a harmonic or melodic focus, you can clearly see how these percussive genres like natvangam and konnakol can still be classed as the arbitrary concept we call music. And on our site in Ecuador, we have a very, very special percussionist. And if I try and screen share again, you should hopefully be able to see his photo. Can you see it? I think you should be able to see it, yeah. So this is called the clubbed wing mannequin. This is a small passerine that lives on the western slopes of the Andes. These fascinating little birds have an incredible mechanism for making sounds. Rather than using the syrinx, which is the avian equivalent of the voice box, these mannequins produce a mechanical sound by scraping their extremely modified wing feathers together like a spoon on a washerboard, for example, like this. Each of their remiges or wing feathers or flight feathers have 7 ridges along its central vein, and I actually have a close-up of those feathers for me to show you. You can see those wing feathers there. So next to the strainly ridged feather is another feather with a stiff curved tip. What the bird does is it raises its feathers and its wings over its back, and it shakes them back and forth about 100 times per second. Each time it hits the ridge, the tip produces a sound. The tip strikes each ridge twice, once as the feathers collide and once again as they move apart. This raking motion allows a wing to produce 14 sounds during each shake. This means that the clubbed wing mannequin can actually produce up to 1,400 single sounds in 1 second alone. Now, this form of mechanical sound production is called sonation, and in fact, Darwin actually called it instrumental music. And whilst it's common in insects and it's called stridulation there, it's not well documented in birds at all. So these mannequins have anatomically adapted their wings in this odd way to attract females through sexual selection. So bird sounds, either mechanically produced or vocally produced, are heavily involved in mating and courtship rituals. For example, the Andean cock of the rock, which is a fabulous bird that you can find on our site in Ecuador. What they do is the males have these confrontational displays at the leks. You may not be able to see my screen. Let me try screen sharing again. Can you see my screen? Yeah. So this is the Andean cock of the rock. And what they do is they have these confrontational displays where these males aggregate to engage in competitive displays. This consists of a pair of males facing each other whilst bowing, jumping, and flapping their wings. They even snap their bills frantically like a pair of castanets. And they do all of this to attract female, and sometimes they give off various squawks and grunting calls. The display turns into a cacophony of bright color and frenzied activity, filling the air with very strange sounds indeed. And all this pomp and circumstance is to serve the functional role of attracting a female. Some birds, on the other hand, prefer to engage their love partner in a duet, like the toucan barbet. And I'm just going to show you a picture of the toucan barbet now. So this is the toucan barbet. What the toucan barbet does is the breeding pair of the small Ecuadorian toucan-like bird sings a duet to affirm their relationship. And this photo was taken by the gourmet biologist. Both sexes can sing either simultaneously or in syncope during the breeding season. Singing simultaneously allows for harmony, which is basically the combination of different sounds. Whereas singing in syncope or out of sync allows for a forward driving musical line. And this rhythmic device is called syncopation. And this is where the notes fall on the offbeat. And it is very prominent in jazz. Let me just play you a little bit of jazz. That type of jazz is called bossa nova jazz. And you can hear that melody driving forward. And that's what the toucan barbet does. Toucan barbets also make some really cool territorial calls. And I know my time is up, so I'd just like to say thank you so much. And as you can see, the musicality of birdsong in this whistle stop tour is a vast and wide-ranging topic. And there are so many crazy and unexpected parallels that you can make between human music and birdsong, especially the music of the musically talented feathery friends over on our site in Ecuador. So thank you so much, Maynard. Thank you.
Yes, that was absolutely amazing. Like I said, that's right up my alley. We're always making these connections between wildlife and the real world. So for you to be able to make that connection to musical anthems that we know and love and that we have an affinity with and showcase the ways that animals can be able to do that in the wild is so amazing. We always talk about biomimicry and utilizing things from nature here for our human benefit. To be able to see that from the musical perspective is absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for that. Appreciate it.
No worries.
Yes. Awesome. We are going to keep this amazing show on the road. I don't know how we top musical elements like that, but we will somehow, some way, because next we have Alice Marlow up next as well too. And I'm going to find Alice in here and bring her on board so I can take all of her time. Alice, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. Alice, you are a zoology student as well in Cornwall, England. We're going to continue some more wildlife discussions as we do our Global Biodiversity Festival. I'm super excited to hear what you have to bring to the table. So the time right now is all yours.
That's great. Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to try and share my screen. Okay, can you see that? Should be able to see that. Okay, so I'm going to start with a bit about myself. So as you said, I'm a university student studying zoology at the University of Exeter at the moment in Cornwall. And today I'm going to be speaking to you a little bit about bird ringing and my experiences in the UK, as well as the amazing project run by our partners, Ecominga, at the Dracula Reserve in Ecuador, and showcasing some of the outstanding birds they caught in November. So I've been really interested in wildlife and birds from a very young age, and I've witnessed helped out with ringing on multiple occasions, but started to train towards a license about last year. So I first came across this activity when I was about 14 at a local nature reserve, and a group of volunteers were carrying out a demonstration of bird ringing, and I was able to see the birds in the hand and up close for the first time. And I remember being absolutely captivated by how intricate and delicate the birds were, and also really interested in how this surveying method can be used to help conserve birds and species and their habitats in general. So these ringing demonstrations are a fantastic way to get people involved in wildlife activities and conservation. COVID-19 has obviously somewhat restricted ringing activities, but photos on social media, I think Saf showed some earlier, of birds in the hand that have really captivated a new audience on Instagram, which I think is brilliant. So here's a picture of a ringing demo similar to the one I went to, and you can see all the children really enjoying it. It's a great way to get youth involved in conservation. And here are some of the birds that I've been ringing over the last year. Been very busy, as you can see. So what is bird ringing? Well, bird ringing is when we trap a bird to take valuable data such as weight, fat reserves, wingspan, and their breeding state. So birds can be fitted with a very lightweight metal ring, which contains a unique code, and that can then be added onto a large database. This can tell us a lot about the bird's age. So I'd like you to look at the bird at the top, the blackbird, and this bird's called a storm petrel. Now, without ringing, we'd probably assume that a bird of this size would live to about 9-10 years old at maximum. But through ringing, we've discovered, through recapturing the birds, that they actually live to a maximum, from what we've caught, 37 years, which is just amazing. And we never would have known this if we hadn't have been catching them, because they're such an elusive bird and spend so much of their time out to sea. Now, birds can also be colour ringed. So here is something that I was working on earlier today. This bird is a baby jackdaw, or a chick. And these birds can be identified without having to recapture them, so it doesn't stress out the bird too much. And what we were doing here is we were looking at jackdaw behaviour with the University of Exeter, so really interesting work. So you might be thinking, how is trapping a bird good for the species survival? Well, birds are actually really good biological indicators of the health of the environment. So a decline in numbers is usually a result of inconsistent climatic conditions, which obviously we're experiencing a lot more of with climate change. A decrease in prey can also lower their numbers, and also contaminants such as pollution. So an example of how useful bird ringing can be for conservation has actually been observed through the pollutant DDT, which was a horrible insecticide, which basically thinned the eggshells of birds of prey. And ringing of blue tits and great tits, like this little fat blue tit over here, ringers were able to figure out that they were actually putting on a lot more fat than they usually would. And that was traced back to a decrease in predation. So the birds of prey were dying off because of this insecticide, and birds were thinking, well, I don't need to be skinny to escape anymore, so I'm going to put on as much fat as I can. And these findings actually helped to get the insecticide banned, because it showed the ecosystem-wide effects of this terrible insecticide. So that's one good factor of bird ringing. And another is we can actually find out a lot about the migration of birds through bird ringing. So by retrapping individuals that have already been ringed in different countries, which are called controls, we are able to tell where the species have travelled. Now, this is really interesting in the UK. We get a lot of birds from the Middle East and Africa, if we're lucky. And we can also tell about their migration path and possible problems they're having in some countries that might target passerines, which are these small songbirds. And we can try and influence policies in these countries to make sure that the conservation of these species is of utmost importance. So, on to Ecuador and our reserve. So this image shows Javier, one of our team members, gently extracting a bird from the mist net. So these nets are very fine and are practically invisible to the birds which fly into them. And they fall into these small pockets and get tangled. We normally do bird ringing in the morning when the birds are most active, and the best weather conditions are cloudy and dry. So the birds can't see the nets glistening in the sun, and it also stops the birds from getting wet and too hot, because obviously the welfare of the birds is of the utmost importance. The birds are then placed into special bags to prevent them from stressing out, and the nets are checked every 15 to 20 minutes. So here you see another picture of the net lane. So this is quite a long one. And additional measurements that we tend to measure when we're doing bird ringing. Sorry, these are just the birds here. You can see the birds in the bag, and they're quite relaxed. So additional measurements that we take when we're measuring the birds include the wing length. So you can see the middle picture here. We just slide the ruler under the wing of the bird, and we can measure it exactly by the millimeter. We can also take measurements such as the tarsus, which is sort of the leg, and also bill measurements. And all of these measurements are really good in contributing to the fitness of the bird, so we can tell how fit the bird is, and that's really important if we're looking at population. So here you can see a wing being measured, and we can actually set the birds and age them by looking at patterns in the plumage. And it takes a lot of training to become a bird ringer. So you have to learn all the patterns and how to know the difference between males and females in every species. And it's a very long process. And then we weigh the birds. So this is a hummingbird on its back. Normally we would put them in pots, but this seems to be a good method for smaller birds. And in pots as well, like this. And then this is the way that we handle them. So on the left, we have the ringer's grip, and on the right, we have the photographer's grip. And you can hold hummingbirds in a slightly different way. We hold them by their wings at the back. And this is the smallest bird on our reserve. It's so cute. It's the Bronzy Hermit, and it weighs 2.5 grams, which is the same as a penny, just insane. And then we tend to let the birds go near the ground so they can hop off into the vegetation. So I'm just going to flick through a few photos here because I realise I'm near the end of my time. And what I'd really like to emphasise here is how important it is to be surveying birds in the tropics, because our idea of bird ringing is so centralised around Europe and North America, because that's obviously where all the money is. That's where a lot of the universities are and the research institutions. But really, when we've got such a biodiverse area in the tropics and birds which live longer than the birds that we get in further up north, then it's so important to observe their behaviour and also see how they're reacting to things like habitat change, fragmentation, like Lucy spoke about earlier. So these are some of the amazing species that we get on site. I'll just flick through a few more of them. They're super cute. And then last but not least, you often get some that have a good go at you before you let them go, have a good pinch. But no, it's such a great, engaging activity to take part in, and it's so important for conservation. So I hope you enjoyed the photos, and I will pass back now.
That was absolutely awesome, Alice. And I'm glad you actually brought that up, because a lot of times this process is overlooked, right? Because this is how we gain the critical data that we need to help further protect these environments and further be able to protect these species. A lot of times they look at bird ringing or, animal capture as, oh, we're just doing experiments or tests. And this gives us critical data, like you said, about the bird's age, what they eat, how they're thriving right now. As they said, they're valuable indicators within ecosystems. So thank you so much for highlighting that. That was absolutely amazing. I learned a lot. It was great.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you again, Alice. Appreciate it. And we're going to keep this show rolling, Up next, we have Zane Libke. We're going to talk some herpetology talk with Zane. I'm bringing Zane on board. How you doing today, Zane?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. You're a herpetologist and a photographer, so I'm expecting to see some beautiful images of all of my favorite herpetology animals, frogs, amphibians, reptiles. Let's go. The stage is all yours.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. If you guys can, hopefully you guys can see that. All right, so I'm going to talk about herps of Dracula Reserve today. First off, a little bit about me. I am a biologist by training. I just graduated from university this past week, actually. And ever since I've been a kid, I've had this passion for reptiles and amphibians, and that's what herps are. And so on the left, you can see a photo of me in doing some research in Ecuador with a lizard and then handling a snake. I went to Ecuador and I did some field work, and I realized that snakes are really difficult to find. And so after that, I found frogs all the time, and I realized, wow, frogs are really interesting. Maybe I should study frogs. So most of this presentation is going to be about frogs. Next year, I'm actually working at a research station down in Ecuador doing some genetic sequencing. And this place is actually a scientific tourism place. So if you're interested in doing tourism revolving around scientists in Ecuador, let me know. Check it out. So a little bit about Ecuador. Ecuador is on the equator, tropical country, incredibly biodiverse, and a lot of that is due to this Andes mountain range. You can see on the map on the left, we have the Andes mountain range splitting the country in half. This is a massive mountain range, up to 20,000 feet in some points, so it really divides the country in half. And on the right side, you can see a deforestation map. The Amazon on the right, on the eastern side, is doing relatively well, but you can see the Chocó on the western side has experienced a lot of deforestation. Except for this area up in the north, this is where the Dracula Reserve, the Reserva Youth Land Trust Reserve, is located. And this has actually been kind of protected over the past few decades because of illicit drug activity. But now that that has kind of subsided, it's starting to be under threat to deforestation once again. So this is a little bit what the reserve looks like. Again, beautiful cloud forest. And just in Ecuador in general, this is an overview of the herp diversity. You can see that frogs take up 600, there's 626 species of frogs in Ecuador, which is just a massive amount. So that's why we're going to focus on that for most of the talk. I do have a few slides of lizards here. These are some lizards that were found on the Reserva Youth expedition a few months ago. And here is a snake. This is a Coronius monocola. This is a parrot snake. They're arboreal, so you can see they're kind of long and skinny, and they have these really large eyes, which indicates that they're diurnal, so they're active during the day. And they're pretty docile. You can see two Reserva Youth Council members here holding one. This next snake is an Erythrolampus. These are very cryptic, very unknown snakes. They're terrestrial, so they're a lot harder to find. And they're actually coral snake mimics. So you can see they have these bright red colors. That's to mimic venomous snakes that are really dangerous that predators don't want to mess with. But this snake is harmless, as you can see with Natalia holding this snake. All right, now on to the real fun stuff. This is the frogs. This is actually a toad. But so the first genus I'm going to talk about is Atelopus. So Atelopus are really interesting toads. They're frequently found in mid to high elevation streams, usually in the Andes, but also throughout Central America. And they're known for having extremely, extremely restricted geographic ranges. So for me as a geneticist, I'm really interested in these frogs because they have very, very small population sizes. And that makes them very difficult to conserve in reality because their populations are so vulnerable. You can see on the right here is a Panamanian golden toad. These are actually now completely extinct in the wild in Panama. And in Ecuador, there are 32 species of Atelopus, and almost all of them are listed as critically endangered. And then right here, Atelopus koinai is an Atelopus that is found on the reserve. It was actually lost to science for 35 years until 2012. It was rediscovered at the Dracula Reserve. And now there are only 3 populations known. So again, it's very important that the reserve that we're working at is protected. And here you can see Danny Valencia, one of the Reserva Youth Council members, looking at Atelopus, which is I'm pointing to right there with the arrow. And then another frog that's really interesting in the reserve is Rabio Colomi. This is actually a toad, but this was rediscovered again around the same time. And they can actually be identified as individuals by these orange markings on their face. And so this is something that the herpetologists in Ecuador are using right now as part of a monitoring program to monitor these populations. This is a young Rabio Colomi. Again, they look very different, just something interesting about them. And then my favorite group, the Prista Mantis. So this is what I focus on in my research, and this is the largest vertebrate genus in the world. There are 546 species in this genus alone, which is just incredible. And this is because they're direct developers. So as opposed to having a tadpole stage, they hatch out as little tiny frogs. So they're able to colonize areas where there's not a lot of water, not standing water. So just to show you the diversity of this group, on the left we have a few different species on the white background. All of these are all different species, and then on the right you can see we have a few different species as well. A lot of them look very similar, which makes it very difficult to identify, and so that's why these genetic techniques are very important for conservation, because without them, we aren't really able to identify a lot of these frogs as distinct species, even though they are biologically. Here's an example of diversity within the genus. This is one species, and these are all the same species. You can see they all look very different, so still very hard to identify. There's also a lot of weird things that these frogs are known to do. This frog was discovered last year, and it can actually change from having spikes to not having spikes. We're not really sure how it does that. So another thing that's really important to investigate. Here's just another really beautiful Prista Mantis. And then this was discovered at the Dracula site a few years ago. This is a blue-eyed Prista Mantis. Just incredible frog. We don't really know much about it. It's orange. We're not sure if it's a new species yet or not, but hopefully it is. And again, another incredible discovery from the reserve. And then lastly, I'm trying to go a little fast here, so sorry if I'm going too fast, but Hylocertus is a really amazing genus of frogs, again associated with mountain streams, and they just tend to be these crazy looking frogs, as you can see right here. We see this Hylocertus diabolus actually has these hypertrophied arms that may be used for either male-to-male combat or more likely for mating. And then you can see some other really interesting examples. This was discovered at one of the Ecominga reserves a few years ago by a 19-year-old Ecuadorian guide, Darwin Recalde, who's holding it in this picture on the left. Just an incredible frog. And this is an example of a frog that Ecominga is using for fundraising. So since there's so many species discovered on these sites, one of the ways that we like to fundraise is by auctioning off naming rights. And so the hope for this frog is that some donor will donate a large sum of money to the reserve to protect the habitat of this frog in exchange for the naming rights. And that's what we at Reserva did a few months ago with this Hylocertus conscientia, which was discovered at the Dracula Reserve site. And we had a naming competition led by youth, only for youth, and we had hundreds of entries, all kinds of really amazing names. And Carolina Bustillos eventually came up with this name, Hylocertus conscientia, just pointing to the fact that we need to be conscious about our environment and the decisions that we make in the world that we live in today, because these are such delicate creatures and they are in danger. But the work that all of these conservationists here at this Global Biodiversity Fest are doing is helping to make that less of a problem. So thank you.
Nice. That was absolutely amazing, Zane. You had me at Herp because I'm a frog lover and frogs are my favorite animal. And it was so awesome being a part of the naming process for Hylocertus conscientia this year. Like you said, we had so many entrants that provided so many amazing names. And I think we picked the perfect name to end it all. So thank you so much for highlighting that. And frogs baffle me to this day. I absolutely love it. So thank you so much for your time, Zane.
Thank you.
Cool. Awesome. Well, we are continuing this ride. Last but not least, I am bringing on board Ian Clarke. Ian Clarke is coming to the room. What is up, Ian? How you doing today?
Howdy.
Awesome, awesome. Ian is a botanist, right? UC Davis, if I'm correct. Yep. Okay, with a focus on trees, forests, and orchids. We know about all these amazing discoveries. I'm going to give the room to you to talk about our amazing plant life that we've been discovering. So take it away. The room is yours, Ian.
All right. So you guys can see my share screen, right? So I am a student at University of California, Davis. I study botany. I specialize in conservation. Specifically, I really love trees and forests, conifers, and orchids. So here I am with some old growth ponderosa pine in the Sierras and one of the lovely old growth redwoods in the coast of California. I'm not currently in California right now, but I also work for the Botanical Conservatory in Davis, and I take care of a lot of very rare and endangered orchids and carnivorous plants and a few other things. So, but our topic today is orchids, and right here is one of the orchids that I have grown, and it also, I believe, lives in Ecuador or somewhere in South America down there. It's Platysteal Stenostachya, and it is incredibly tiny. Those flowers are only a few millimeters long. So orchids are really, really cool. They're one of my favorite families of plants. They're very numerous. There's about 30,000 species of them or more, depending who you ask. But there are more being discovered every single day. They grow all over the world except for Antarctica. You can find some up in the Arctic, actually, that come up from underground during the spring and then go back down to avoid the frost. And they're very specialized plants. They're incredibly highly evolved. They are so complicated in just about everything. Their life cycle, their pollination mechanisms. This family includes some of the most bizarre plants on Earth. But that also means because they're so specialized, they're very, very vulnerable to human-made disturbances. So a little bit about the biology of orchids. Like most plants, they start as seeds, but orchids start off as like dust. So if you were to grow orchid seeds, you would have to grow them on a petri dish because they are so tiny. They are almost like it's like sowing the spores of a fungus. They are incredibly small. And because they're so small, they don't have any energy reserves in their seed, hardly anything there. They actually need to form a symbiotic association, sometimes parasitic association, with a fungus. And a lot of these orchids have specific species of fungus or specific families of fungus that they will associate with. So they need to acquire a little bit of sugar from this fungus if they are to germinate. So that means that these orchids need very healthy soil or healthy moss or just a healthy environment in general if they are able to thrive and be biodiverse there. And of course, with their flowers being so crazy, they are very specialized for their pollinators. So almost every single orchid will specialize in a very select few insects to be pollinated by. Some orchids specialize in only one insect. And that is why they have such diverse flowers. Many will actually trap or trick pollinators into pollinating them. And what makes orchids very special to the Dracula Reserve is that the Dracula Reserve is named after a genus of orchids, Dracula. Dracula grows in the mountain rainforests in Ecuador and the cloud forests. They mimic fungi to fool fungus gnats into pollinating them. And we use the orchid biodiversity as an indicator that a site is very valuable for conservation. Because these orchids are so dependent on healthy fungi, their specific population of insects, basically they need a lot of biodiversity around them. That means, when we're finding a lot of orchids in one place, a lot of different species, that's a very good indicator that area has a lot of different species. It's very rich in its species, and is therefore very important to protect. Dracula Reserve is, as mentioned previously, home to Fragmentation fisheri, which is one of the most endangered plants on Earth, possibly the most endangered orchid, that's well known at least. And Dracula has the only wild population of these. There's a single little cliff face that has less than 20 of these plants growing out of it. And the reserve is also home to many undescribed species of orchids. Every single time people go in there to explore it, they often come back with a new species of orchid that was not yet previously known to science. And there are a lot of good reasons for that. Most of them are very tiny, and they will grow on the ends of little twigs or in little cracks of tree bark. You will get entire plants living in tiny spaces about the size of a quarter, or that could fit on your fingernail. They are so small, and they will cover a tree. So you can, if you ever find a fallen tree in the cloud forest, if you walk along it, you're going to see all sorts of different species of orchids. Each along the tree trunk is probably going to be specialized for a different little microenvironment. And this is part of why they're so diverse, is because they can adapt to such very, very specific environments like these. So yeah, for this reason, right, if a tree is holding 100 different species of orchids, you can only imagine how many species are living in just an acre, or like a square kilometer, right, or the whole reserve. So, and then you think about how much rainforest is being cut down every single day. We are probably losing way more species than we even know of these little orchids. So that is why land conservation is incredibly important for preserving biodiversity, because these orchids, they are not going to be saved through ex situ cultivation or through specimen collection. Their environments need to be preserved. They can't persist in the wild unless they have an intact environment to live in. So yeah, we are losing an incredibly valuable chunk of biodiversity just in orchids alone. I mean, we're not even discussing insects or yeasts or fungi or anything else, or mosses, anything else that is like orchids in that it prefers just a very, very specific tiny little environment to live in. That is why they are really in need of our help. If we are to save a lot of the species which will become vulnerable in the next decades, we really need to be getting serious about preserving land, because there are a lot of species which just simply can't survive or persist unless there is a very healthy, intact ecosystem that is not being harvested or interfered with by industry. Deforestation is probably one of the greatest causes of biodiversity loss here in the tropics. So, yeah, that is part of the reason why Dracula Reserve is so important, is because it contains such an incredible amount of plant, animal, and fungus diversity. And it's important that these places get expanded and more reserves are made if we are to save a lot of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of species from extinction in the next century. So,
yes.
And of course, orchids are such a great indicator of all of that. Yeah. So
that is awesome. Ian, thank you so much. There's no better way to cap it off than that, of how important it is for all the work that everybody presented today, how important this work is for conservation. This whole group right here, this right here, the Dracula Reserve, Reserva, all-stars in the building. I wish we could bring everybody back on live and have all of our faces to do a full recap, but unfortunately, there's so much more of the show left. But Ian, that was absolutely amazing from a botanist perspective, talking about the importance of plant life. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. So we are keeping the show rolling. I would like to thank everybody so much for tuning into this segment. I'm going to be tossing it over because we have so many more amazing things going on today on the Biodiversity Festival. But I hope that was a great takeaway. I hope you learned some things about the work that Reserva is doing, about all the important organisms that thrive right now in the Dracula Reserve. It's absolutely critical that we do everything that we can to protect our wildlife and our plant life in that location in Ecuador. So I'm going to hand it over to your next host, who's going to be taking you over to the next segment of this Biodiversity Festival. Make sure you go to the website, to the numbers that's available, provide your donations. Everything is going towards conservation. So Jesse, I think it's your turn to take over from here. And I'm gonna let you go. I'm thrilled right now. I'm about to go check out some more photos and do some recap with my Reserva crew.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Maynard. Again, it's hard, coming into this, trying to follow up your hosting job. You are so hyped up. It's awesome. It's getting a little bit late here. Thus, the sketchy sort of ring light that's blasting me away. But really appreciate your effort today. And we're all rebels together. We had so much fun with that program that even the next speaker loved watching all you fantastic Youth Reserva folks. So thank you so much for sharing that enthusiasm. And Maynard, I really appreciate you joining us.
Yes. Today. Thank you. Go Reserva team. Woo, woo.